Today we're trying the €275 8-course 4-hour tasting menu at Louis Linster, one of only 2 restaurants in Luxembourg currently holding 2 Michelin stars. The restaurant is located in Fréiseng, a small town about 10 kilometers south of Luxembourg City and only a few minutes from the French border. And there's actually a lot of history behind this restaurant. It dates back to 1982, when Louis Linster took over her family's inn in Fréiseng and transformed it into her own fine dining restaurant. 5 years later, in 1987, she earned the restaurant its first Michelin star. Then in 1989, she became the first woman ever to win the Bocuse d'Or, which is one of the most prestigious cooking competitions in the world. Louis eventually joined the family restaurant and later took over from his mother. Under his leadership, the restaurant earned its second Michelin star in 2025, and today the restaurant carries his name. The cooking still has a strong modern French foundation, but Louis brings in a lot of Japanese, Nordic, and other international influences. Even the restaurant itself features very refined without being overly formal. The dining room is modern and elegant, and it overlooks the countryside surrounding Fréiseng. When I visited, the full 8-course tasting menu was €275, and there was also a shorter 6-course option for €220. They offered a wine pairing at €90 for 5 glasses or €120 for 7 glasses, as well as a juice pairing for €70 or €90. I went with the full 8-course without any pairing, mostly for cost reasons. But before any of those started, they brought out a series of amuse-bouche. The first was a 36-month aged parmesan with nutmeg and malted barley. This was crispy, intensely savory, and packed with umami. But the next bite completely stole the show. This was crab with bitter orange, vey du ven, which is an Indian spice mix, and dashi. It was sweet, savory, citrusy, slightly spiced, and everything hit you almost at once. I honestly could have eaten 10 of this. This was one of those bites where I immediately thought, okay, the rest of this meal is probably going to be really good. Next was a macaron filled with toro, which is the fatty belly of the tuna, along with caviar, chervil, and wasabi. You get all that richness from the toro and caviar, followed by a little sharpness from the wasabi. And getting caviar this early into the meal definitely set the tone for what was coming. And the final amuse-bouche was lobster with miyoga, jalapeno, and lavage, which was another spectacular bite. And finally, the courses begin. The first official course is hamachi or Japanese amberjack, served with black radish, a yuzu kosho vinaigrette, and basil oil. This was a really clean and bright way to officially start the menu. You have the richness of the fish, acidity, and a little heat from the yuzu kosho, and then that freshness from the basil and radish. After that came the bread and butter service. They served salted butter from Brittany in France, a small traditional baguette, and a brioche made with puff pastry. The baguette was really good, warm and perfectly crunchy, but the brioche was on another level. You can see all the intricate layers, and it had this incredibly crunchy, light, and buttery texture. This was honestly one of the most well-crafted brioches I've ever had. The next course is an Arctic char served with broccoli, sesame, and several preparations of kombu seaweed, along with the dashi beurre blanc, which basically combines a classic French butter sauce with the savory flavor of Japanese dashi. This ended up being one of my favorite courses of the night. The Arctic char was cooked perfectly, but what really made this dish was the sauce. You have the richness of a traditional beurre blanc, but the dashi and seaweed added this deep savory and almost ocean-like flavor. Even with all those elements, the fish was still the main focus. The third course was white asparagus, and this actually came in 2 different preparations. The first had wild white asparagus with kumquat and a foam made with daidai, which is a Japanese citrus fruit. The second preparation was a chawanmushi, which is a Japanese savory egg custard, with white asparagus in a vinaigrette made with tarragon, lemongrass, and kaffir lime. One side was brighter and more citrusy, while the chawanmushi was softer and more delicate. I thought these 2 preparations were really unique and flavorful. Next is a turbot, served with butter and sake, razor clam, cucumber, sea lettuce mousse, and Osetra Imperial caviar. There are some very premium ingredients here, but what I liked throughout this meal is that they never seemed to use an ingredient just because it was expensive. The caviar, razor clam, and sea lettuce all reinforce that ocean flavor around the turbot instead of distracting from the fish. Next is a langoustine, served with butternut squash, sea buckthorn, and an aji amarillo sauce made from the yellow chile commonly used in Peruvian cooking. And this was another one of my favorite courses of the entire meal. The langoustine itself was sweet and incredibly delicate, while the aji amarillo brought some heat and acidity. Then you get sweetness from the squash and tartness from the sea buckthorn. There were several completely different flavors on the plate, but everything somehow felt balanced. The final savory course was a Burgos duck that also came in two different preparations. The main plate had duck fillet served with apricot, almonds, crispy fennel, and a gravy flavored with spice like anise, cinnamon, and cardamom. The duck was beautifully cooked, and I really liked the combination of the richer meat with the fruit and spices. Then on the side was a Chinese-style bao stuffed with meat from the duck leg. I really like this because instead of just giving you more duck on another plate, they completely changed the texture and presentation. Even 6 savory courses into the meal, they were still finding ways to change the texture and style of each dish. Then we move on into dessert. The 7th course was raspberry with matcha ice cream, cheesecake, java pepper, and small crunchy pieces of creme isigni added on top. This was tart, creamy, and refreshing. And the bitterness from the matcha helped balance the sweetness of the raspberry. And then the 8th and final official course was Yorkshire forced rhubarb with shiso and a sheep's milk sorbet. It came with a samba juice made with red fruits, mango, and cranberry. Again, it was very bright and refreshing, which I thought was a much better way to end an 8-course menu than finishing with something extremely heavy. But apparently, 8 courses weren't enough because they brought out an entire final selection of sweets. There was a Japanese crown melon from Shizo, which was unbelievably sweet. Then there was a Paris Bresse with praline and hazelnut, a quenelle from Bordeaux, which was very spongy, a biscuit with coconut and yuzu, and white chocolate with finger lime and lime. At this point, I was impressed that even the Petite Fours still felt like a proper part of the experience, rather than just some random sweets added at the end. And that finally ended what was basically a 4-hour dining experience. Overall, this was easily one of the strongest tasting menus I've had so far, and what impressed me most wasn't one particular expensive ingredient or one flashy presentation, it was how consistent the entire meal was. There were obviously favorites. The crab amuse-bouche was almost life-changing, the Arctic char was incredible, and the langoustine was another standout. But I genuinely thought every official course was excellent. The French foundation of the cooking is very obvious, especially through all the sauces and technical preparation, but then you constantly get ingredients and ideas from Japan, Peru, and other parts of the world. And unlike some tasting menus where that many influences can make the meal feel disconnected, everything here still felt like it belonged together. The service was also some of the best I've ever had. Plates were cleared quickly, utensils were changed between courses, and despite the meal lasting around 4 hours, the pacing never felt rushed or unnecessarily slow. At €275, this is obviously an expensive meal, especially if you add one of the pairings. But after 8 courses, 4 amuse-bouche, bread service, and all that extra sweets at the end, I definitely felt like I got a complete experience. And more importantly, there wasn't a single course where I felt like the quality dropped off. For me, this is exactly what I want from a 2 Michelin star tasting menu: excellent ingredients, precise cooking, creative combinations, and enough memorable dishes that I'm still thinking about them afterward. Louis Linster gets a 10 out of 10.